So we have been receiving questions as the session has gone on. Conscious of time, aware that we probably won't get through all the questions, but I know iMOVE have committed to trying to get responses from Sam and David to the questions that we have received. So any questions we don't get through today, responses will be posted on the website. And I was intending to go through the questions in order in which we received them, but I hope I'm not going to upset anybody if actually I pick out a question that I think is quite interesting first for the panelists perhaps to address. And the question has come in from Richard Delplace. And Richard says, hi, are you considering providing other benefits to customers beyond discounts for transport for other services that may encourage modal shift, discounts on coffee in specific CBD areas, rewards in form of points that can be translated into transport or other services, for instance?
Well, I might make the first comment if I could. In a sense, that relates to my last slide when I talked about the need, especially in a commercial environment, to have to go outside of the traditional transport model to look at some of those ancillary services. So absolutely right. I think that's going to be essential to make these things work financially. So we would always welcome suggestions. I mean, one of the obvious ones has been some interaction with the retail sector, and even, dare I say, MaaS equivalent of frequent flyer points in order to get additional benefits by joining up.
Yeah, similarly, I think I've touched on that point near the end too. So I love the idea of having some other benefits baked in there. We did also discuss as part of the trial, we talked about some sort of gamification elements as well, where you might have leaderboards of people or putting them into groups of similar to the CO2 challenge, sort of showing people that were changing their behavior in a really good way and trying to encourage some sort of social thing relatively anonymously, but show you what cohort you were sort of moving through and perhaps provide rewards for doing so. So there's lots of interesting things that you could do with that. Yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'll go back up to the top of the list now. Question from Rory Garland. MaaS would probably stimulate some wider mobility solutions, but will MaaS influence how public transport is operated? If so, how?
Nice to hear from you, Rory. I haven't seen you since we worked on the metro projects many years ago. It's a good question. One of the concerns that I had, certainly pre-COVID, was I didn't see any MaaS-specific initiatives that would be unique to those who signed up for the program in terms of using public transport. But I think it's a great question as to where it might help. Post-COVID, I'm really not sure. It's early days yet, but I do think it's a great question. And my general sense is that there's not going to be any special treatment of public transport for MaaS users compared with other users at this juncture.
I agree. We saw public transport as absolutely key, like the core part of the MaaS offering. So if anything, I think there's potentially a risk of trying to take too many people away from that, unless you're sort of flattening the horse, or whatever the great metaphor that David used at the end was. I think if you move too far towards putting people into Ubers and make that too easy compared to getting on a train, that's potentially an issue. So we were trying to be a bit careful with that, with the way incentives were offered. And I think any sort of plan where you just said, it's all you can eat, you know, $500 a month, go crazy, use all the Uber, all the public transport you like, you do risk a lot of people deciding to jump in that Uber all the time and substitute public transport, which is not necessarily what we want, unless it's in the right periods.
I just quickly add, Kate, that the discounting, of course, is all financial, when in fact we know that many people's choice of a mode is more a function of convenience, service levels, reliability. And so there's a real question which we have posed in our work as to how we can build them in to give a distinctive advantage to MaaS compared with just offering financial incentives. I think that's the question, that's the challenge.
Thanks, David. So the next question on the list, very topical, from an anonymous attendee. With COVID-19, we see in some regions, for instance in the Wuhan region, where car usage has significantly increased compared to prior to the pandemic. This could be due to a range of factors, including social distancing. How can MaaS be an attractive proposition to people post-pandemic?
I hinted at that at the beginning, and it's certainly related to the challenge with sharing and social distancing. And I do think we will start to see a greater use of cars in Australia as well. What does this mean for MaaS? If MaaS is going to be pretty much focused on sharing only and not doing something about protecting through biosecurity a non-shared mode, then I think we're in real trouble.
Yeah. I concur. I think I don't see MaaS as necessarily in itself changing the modes per se. It's what you would include in the bundle. So we may see new forms of on-demand transport emerge that are more post-COVID friendly, and perhaps partitioning people that sit in them while allowing there to be some sort of sharing take place, or greater distancing inside shared transport. I think those changes will come, but the question around MaaS's influence on that, I think if you have an appropriate sort of a bundle that includes the private modes that people want, there's also car subscription services like Car Bar, etc., that could be put into these, that are sort of, you can change a car month on month. Anything that's reducing the ownership still falling into this bucket and could potentially be adapted to suit these sort of situations.
I think my point on working from home is going to be increasingly important as well, and it might need to result in MaaS being rethought in terms of its pricing model and how you subscribe in terms of the time period.
Thanks, David. In view of time, I'm afraid I think we're going to have to call a halt to the questions there. There are quite a few more that I hope we'll find the time to respond to and put that up on the iMOVE website. So it really just remains for me to say thank you very much to the panelists for their contribution to the session. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you'll all agree, and I've been very privileged to facilitate.